LOK Publishing presents Legacy of the Past. An Untold Tales of Kalda story. By Dan Zangari and Robert Zangari. Author's Foreword. We originally wrote this story as part of the indie fantasy Edicts annual anthology, From the Ashes. The theme of that anthology was retired heroes, with many of the tales featuring a one last hurrah conflict. While many of our characters could fit in this anthology, we wanted to explore the Mages of Alath and one of their own who had strayed from the order. Enter, Naeala Sai'ar. With a point-of-view character such as Naeala, we're able to explore aspects of lore we haven't been able to write about with our other short stories. While we have mentioned tevisrals, we've not mentioned how they are constructed. There are also plenty of Easter eggs in this story and some hints at a few mysterious characters found throughout the Legends of Kalda universe. Sincerely, Dan Zangari and Robert Zangari. Salt Lake City, 2022. Legacy of the Past. Magic and morality must go hand in hand, lest you create an unstoppable force of evil. From Edicts of the Mage-King, Preface. 6461 CD. Naeala's wrinkled fingers tensed as she dismissed her magical fire. The flames crackled, then vanished from the Barshan-protected crucible holding her latest creation, a thin molten strand of pale green oxlica, a rare gemstone found in the depths of Kalda's crust. When refined, oxlica could harness the channels of power. A faint hiss carried from the crucible and Naeala took a deep breath. She focused on maintaining the blue barrier of her Barshan around the oxlica so the gemstone would keep its new form. The strand had to remain true to the mold. Once before, a strand of Surluya had only slightly expanded, but when she added it to the other components for the tevisral, a cascading effect rendered every piece unworkable. All the components of that magical object had to be discarded. Through her magic she could sense the gemstone's intense heat. It pressed against her Barshan, causing it to flicker. "You will not defy me," she said, her voice hoarse. She rasped the words of an incantation, and blue light swirled from her fingertips, seeping into the crucible and around the molten strand, forming another layer of protective magic. The pressure of the molten gemstone intensified, and the inner layer of Barshan shattered. But the oxlica's expansion was soon halted by the outer layer of reinforcing magic. Hopefully that swelling wouldn't be a problem. After she recast 4 more inverted Barshans, the oxlica had ceased hissing, cooling enough to hold its new form. The glistening strand, once an unrefined jagged cube a quarter the size of her fingernail, now spanned the length of her forearm. Naeala sighed in relief and grabbed tiny tweezers beside the crucible. She gently raised the oxlica strand, now devoid of Barshan, and moved it to a nearby worktable, toward a pair of polished granite cubes spaced a hand's width apart. A harmonious rang through the workshop as the oxlica touched the granite and the strand began to glow with soft emerald light. Exhaustion began to overtake her, and Naeala dismissed the Barshan barriers surrounding her and her workshop. The fiery magic she had used was so hot that it would have not only melted the crucible, but turned her entire cottage to ash. And the surrounding woods. Stretching, Naeala moved to a chair beside the worktable, brushing a curly gray lock from her face. The oxlica was still ringing, though fainter than at first. She let her eyes linger on it, then she glanced to the pieces of an off-white vambrace, the forearm portion of her armor that would house the channeling tevisral. It was a design all her own, derived from the channeling staffs used by mages. Those staffs could accelerate magic, propelling bolts and blasts at tremendous speeds. But this tevisral, if what was claimed in her stolen texts was true, would be as grand as those magical devices found only in myth and legend. Over the past 5 years she had secretly devoted her life to the creation of that vambrace, and other tevisrals like it. Possessing tevisrals in the kingdom of Los was a violation of the Edicts of the Mage-King, the kingdom's supreme law created by Doran, the Mage-King. If possession is tantamount to treason, she sometimes wondered, then what would creation be? She had never dwelt long on the imagined answer. As a Grand Mage of Alath and an agent of the Order, Naeala was held to a higher standard of conduct than a common citizen. If she was caught, her punishment would be much more severe. All violators were doomed to the crude cells of Audiobook, a name that evoked terror for an average Lossian. But for an Alathian mage, the sentence was worse than death. Within Audiobook's depths a mage was cut off from the channels of power. Mages incarcerated there always emerged estranged from magic. Many lost their connection completely, and few ever reconnected with the channels as intimately as they had prior to their imprisonment. But if she, a Grand Mage and agent of the Order, were caught, she would surely never emerge from Audiobook's depths. Her life, as she knew it, would end. For what was a mage without the channels of power? Useless, she thought. But that price was worth paying to end Mindolarnian tyranny. Since her childhood, the kingdom of Los had fought against the ever-expanding Mindolarn Empire. Magic alone was not enough to stop Mindolarnian aggression. In the 54 years since the first skirmish, many of her order had perished, including her pupils. Lisna had been the last to fall, and it was her death that proved magic was not enough. If we had had tevisrals, we might have stopped the Mindolarnians years ago, and perhaps she would still be alive. Naeala's thoughts turned to her other pupils. Perhaps they all would be alive. The harmonious ringing faded into silence but was soon replaced by a loud rapping at the cottage's entrance. Naeala spun out of her chair. Another set of loud knocks pounded the door. Who could that be? She glanced about her workshop, noting the tevisrals she had constructed over the past year, each was in plain sight. She swiftly uttered an incantation, mustering white-blue particles that soon formed veils of invisibility. Once outside her workshop she closed its door, locked it, then continued toward the cottage's tiny foyer. A third set of knocks, louder than the others, resounded through the home. "One moment!" Naeala shouted, glancing to a small study beside the foyer. It held only a chair, a worn sofa, and a knee-high wooden table. Good, nothing incriminating in there. Master Sai'ar. A familiar voice carried through the door. We have urgent business to discuss. Naeala narrowed her eyes. Master? She had not told anyone from the Order where she had secluded herself, but then again, the Order of the Mages of Alath had eyes everywhere. Wary, Naeala opened the door. Four robed men stood on her covered porch, their cloaks cowls drawn over their heads, their faces barely visible. Each looked half her age, most likely in their early 30s, and she started, recognizing the foremost of them, Ulmar, the son of Adrin. He was taller than the others, with hawk-like features resembling his father's. His striking sapphire eyes were determined. Fierce. Ulmar removed his cowl, a grim expression contorting his sharp face. May we enter? Naeala nodded, stepping back from the door. She gestured to the study, but remained in the hall. The four mages entered, all removing their damp cloaks. Had it rained? The sky outside was clear. She scanned the yard, and her eyes fell upon four partly muddied mounds near the stone walkway leading into the woods, undoubtedly the remains of transmogrified steeds. Must have been raining elsewhere. She closed the door then joined her visitors in the study. Would you care for something to drink? One of the mages flinched, undoubtedly in response to hearing her raspy voice. No thank you, Ulmar said, rummaging through his robe. The others shook their heads, but the shortest of them narrowed his eyes and spoke. You're a long way from Alath. Why did you settle in these mountains anyway? We're not here to interrogate her, Rindon, another said, his tone firm. Rindon huffed. I'm just curious. Ulmar smiled at Rindon in apparent sympathy but then returned his gaze to Naeala, a rolled parchment now in his hand. It was held in place by an oversized silver ring. I don't know how much you could have heard in your seclusion, but over the last 6 months the kingdom's armies have made a significant push through Formiclis. 4 days ago we liberated the capital, and the Mindolarnians have fallen back to the Klatar range. They are amassing their forces in a stronghold in the mountains. He held the parchment toward Naeala. The Premier General is mustering the kingdom's entire military might to siege Clotar, calling on soldiers in reserve and retired mages, like yourself. He paused, studying Naeala. I've been tasked with leading a contingent of agents of the Order to infiltrate the stronghold. His fierce gaze intensified. And I want you with us. We will slay all of Emperor Mindolarn's brothers, and anyone else who stands in our way. Naeala chuckled and stared at the rolled parchment. You're just like your father. Bold. Daring. And reckless. But then, Adrin was much like his and Naeala's master in the magical arts, Zatran Far. I suppose Zatran made us both reckless. She could easily imagine her master constructing tevisrals in secret, just as she did. Almar studied her, his gaze determined. And we can avenge Lisna. Naeala's stomach tensed. She shuddered, averting her gaze and resisting gruesome memories. But anger and sorrow began to swell within her. She folded her arms, but the gesture did not help. So, they are there. Almar nodded. I saw her murderers in the capital. But they fled with the princes before I could engage them. It was quite the rout, Rindon said. You should have seen Almar. A grunt left Almar's lips. They will not escape this time. Nor will the Emperor or his brothers. Mendal will fall by my hand. He stepped toward Naeala, holding the parchment toward her. Here is your summons from the Premier General, and a means for you to join us. Naeala closed her eyes, arms still folded. Why now? I'm not ready. Parchment pressed against the back of her hand. I know this is a lot to ask, Almar said, and Naeala opened her eyes. She sucked in her breath, and reluctantly took the parchment. The ring binding it was inset with a Rogulan crystal, a dark blue gem accented by golden flecks. Such rings were used by agents of the Order to teleport to Alath, or to another mage elsewhere in the world. This particular ring was large enough to fit on a mage's battle garb. The Rogulan is bound to a battle platform outside the capital, Almar said, stepping back toward the other mages. Premier General Graydon is driving our forces north, and we should be ready to strike in 4 days. Naeala studied the Rogulan ring and fought back a grimace. I don't have a choice, do I? We always have a choice, Almar said, then nodded to the man who had remained silent. A teleporting incantation left that mage's lips, golden particles swirling from his hands. The 4 mages grabbed onto each other as a portal formed around them. Naeala shielded her eyes as the light burst, whisking the mages away from the study. The magic faded, but the acrid odor of a portal, a blend of rotten eggs and citrus juice, lingered in the air. Holding the parchment intensified her anger while invoking a harrowing sense of dread concerning her work. I'm not ready, she muttered, balling her fists. Though she had made great strides in creating several tevisrals, her arsenal was not enough to ensure victory. She walked back to her workshop, pulled the ring from the parchment, and unrolled the summons. Filled with formal language, it gave Premier General Graydon's detailed account of the kingdom's military actions over the past 6 months. And now I issue this charge, she read. As paragons of justice, it is our duty to liberate all who suffer under Mindolarnian oppression. By the power invested in me, I hereby call every man and woman able to. Naeala tossed the parchment aside and threw open the workshop's door. She knew how that rhetoric ended, and the affixed punishments for defying the decree. No matter her choice, all she had worked for would be lost, either by death, by becoming a fugitive, or by imprisonment in the depths of Outlawed. No, she growled, throwing the Rogulan ring. It bounced off the wall with a sharp ting and landed beside the crucible. Fury mounting, Naeala screamed and fell to her knees. Damn you, Doran! She pounded her fists against the wooden floor as if against the Mage-King himself. Damn you and your edicts! May you burn in Tartalan for all eternity. She continued to scream, losing control over the suppressed memories of Lisna and her murderers, those crimson Praetorians who called themselves the Onyx Twins, Surika and Yurmalden. Even after 5 years, Naeala felt as if she were still on that battlement, smelling the stench of desiccated flesh and hearing the howling laments of the maimed, their rhythmic wails leaving her ears ringing. And hearing her own warning cries, echoing through the baleful cacophony as if they belonged to another. Through perfect recollection, Naeala saw Lisna's Barshan weakened, pierced by a black blade composed of magic that dissolved all it touched. But that blade was not her doom, though particles of it eroded her battle garb and consumed her flesh. Golden light reached from a fist-sized portal behind her, pulling her into the timeless void where conjurers kept their menagerie of creatures, the Vizurm Expanse. But unlike most portals to that timeless void, the one Lisna passed through compressed her upon herself, instantly killing her. When Surika hurled Lisna back from the Vizurm Expanse, she was nothing more than an unrecognizable mass of flesh, metal, and cloth. That horrific image lingered in Naeala's mind. Tears welled and then streamed down her cheeks, dripping on the workshop's wooden floor. Soon, her emotions settled to a simmer, and Almar's last words came to her. "I can run," she thought. "Flee from the mainland, from civilization." But that choice felt wrong. She stared at the grain in the wooden floor, and she knew, with every fiber of her being, she knew she must obey Graydon's summons. Naeala stood, waving her hand in a dismissal to reveal the tevisrals she had concealed. Each was once a piece of off-white plating belonging to her mage's battle garb, both gauntlets, one vambrace, part of a breastplate, and 2 sabatons. But now the plating had become powerful tevisrals capable of maintaining, containing, and propelling magic. With a renewed sense of determination, Naeala stepped toward the worktable holding her latest creation. "Let's hope 4 days is enough to complete you." Naeala scarcely rested after Almar's visit. She melted a second strand of oxlica and fastened it to the vambrace housing. Within those 2 strands she intended to contain Arpran magic to mend her wounds if her Barshan were shattered. But the piece of her breastplate turned tevisral had been built to accommodate a reserve of Barshan that would surround her. One could never be too careful. While crafting a 3rd strand, Naeala's concentration waned from fatigue. The inverted Barshan shifted, and the reformed oxlica expanded. She pressed it back into place with her magic, but the strand had several impurities, and its glow was much fainter than the others. "Do I dare use it?" Without it the vambrace would not function correctly, the Arpran magic would leak from the other parts of the tevisral. "Best I don't." Evening drew near, and the fatigue of the past few days set in. After warming a pot of stew by aid of her magic, Naeala ate while reviewing geological confluxes for sustaining destructive flows, one of the tomes she had stolen. It had been in the Hillinard, a Mindolarnian institution of higher learning responsible for curating knowledge and creating tevisrals. Shortly after Lisna's death, Naeala had journeyed to Mindolarn's capital and infiltrated their storehouse of knowledge. The heist was more fruitful than she had anticipated. Each tome she found had duplicates elsewhere in the Hillinard, some numbering in the dozens. How the Mindolarnians had obtained such knowledge, she did not know. Such texts should have been lost to the world. The sun had set in the east when Naeala finished eating. If she were to survive tomorrow's ordeal she would need to rest. She stared at Kalda's moons, Kistern shining brighter than Kalern. Was this the last night she would gaze upon their beauty? Surely, appearing on the battlefield with her newly constructed tevisrals would end her life as she knew it. The next morning Naeala exited her cottage, girded in her enhanced battle garb. The tevisral pieces were bulkier than simple armor plating, inlaid as they were with reformed gemstones that connected to the various strands within. Those stones acted as emitters for the stored magic. This was the first time she had donned the pieces since their completion. Though the tevisrals were heavier than their plain plate counterparts, they were not encumbering. Nor would they interfere with her preferred style of fighting, infusing hand-to-hand combat with destructive magics. In fact, they would amplify every aspect of that deadly art. Once near the trees, she turned to face the cottage she had called home these last 4 years. The plain wooden structure was exactly as she had first seen it. Abandoned, with few furnishings. Earlier, she had divested it of all her belongings and placed them within the Vizurm expanse. That timeless void was meant for preservation, not destruction. Looking to the west, she shielded her eyes against the morning sun. She raised her gauntlet hand, focusing on the Rogulan ring. "Today we change the world," she said. "And my life." Golden light veiled Naeala's vision, accompanied by a fleeting wave of nausea. Eruptions, louder than thunder, rang overhead as she arrived on the alabaster battle platform. Had the siege already begun? Steadying herself, Naeala looked skyward. An expansive Barshun dome spread dozens of city blocks in each direction, enveloping the entire war camp. It was assailed by an unnatural storm, undoubtedly cast by a group of Mindolarnian mages. A nasal voice called amid the noise, "Are you Master Sai'ar?" She turned as a lanky middle-aged man clad in leather armor approached with a large sack. Naeala nodded. "How late am I?" "We began the siege before sunrise." The man reached into the pack. "The Premier General managed to drive us quicker than he anticipated." He retrieved a small pouch from the sack and handed it to Naeala. "The Rogulan inside will take you to Vazar." Slipping the Rogulan ring from her gauntlet, Naeala placed it in the pouch and removed a Rogulan shard half the size of her thumb. "May the powers be with you," the man said, taking the pouch. He hurried away as Naeala uttered the teleporting incantation. Golden light swirled from her gauntlet hand, but the Rogulan did not glow. Wary, she finished the spell, but no portal formed. "That does not bode well." She glanced to the man, who looked aghast. "I'll find another way," she said, tossing the crystal to him. Turning back toward the eruptions, Naeala studied the magic-filled sky. Myriad bolts, beams, and streaks of destructive power assailed the Barshun dome. The quickest way to the stronghold would be to hurl herself with a telekinetic blast. Her sabatons had been crafted to emit that sort of power. But with the raging torrent overhead, it would be too risky. "I suppose I need to awaken you, old friend." With that, she hurried from the battle platform. The screams of the dying, the clanking of metal, and the sounds of eruptions carried from the foothills beyond the war camp. The army's rear line was perhaps 2 grand finials away, a distance equal to 10 city blocks. The kingdom's forces were divided into 3 regiments, each assailing a separate part of the blue-gray mountains. Naeala, however, could not tell which route was the shortest to the stronghold. After darting through the camp for several minutes, she happened upon mounds of dirt and rock. More than enough. She extended her gauntlet hand and closed her eyes. "Teishar, come." Focused on her stomach, she willed her Baelnarn to manifest, the transcendent essence of a Yiddoth. A pricking sensation surged through her arm, then dissipated. Exhaling, Naeala watched as a white speck floated through the air. Once it struck the mound, earthen debris rose from 4 points. The limbs of a great feline formed, then a torso, and lastly a head and tail. Most Alathian mages took horses for Baelnarns, but Naeala wanted a companion more versatile. Luckily, her master in the arts had accepted her request. Zatrin took her to the southern parts of the Mealer forest and together they found an old Yiddoth, a green-furred feline with brown stripes. Through her magic she formed a bond with the creature, coming to an understanding that at the end of his life his essence would live on with her. As Grand Master of the Order, Zatrin was privileged to know how to enact such a ritual, and 3 years later that same white speck came to Naeala. Since then, Teishar had been her loyal mount and sometime battle companion for 4 decades. Naeala smiled as Teishar became fully formed, down to the minutest detail, a perfect recreation of his mortal body. "This might be our last time together," she said, stepping toward the transmogrified Yiddoth. She brushed her gauntlet hand through the earthen-made fur. "Whatever the outcome, know that you will always be a dear friend." Teishar bowed his head. She mounted him and uttered a transmutative incantation, mustering brown light. The magic surged into the mound, then a liquefied strand swirled around Tayshar's mouth and neck, becoming a metal halter and leather reins. Tayshar bolted from the war camp at magically enhanced speed, moving toward the westernmost regiment. Yiddoths were swift creatures, but when enhanced they could outrun a man tenfold. And, as a Baelnarn, Tayshar could sprint for all eternity. Holding tight to the reins, Naeala mustered her magic, directing each spell into the tevisrals of her armor. Her breastplate shone with a dark blue hue while her gauntlet glowed with purple disintegrating light. As they neared the army's rear line, she enhanced herself, quickening her speed, agility, and strength. Weave through. She uttered another incantation, mustering an Arpran aura. Now that they were upon the foothills, she could see a switchback ramp ascending the mountain pass behind a 3-story gate made of the mountain stone, its doors shut. Lining the ramp, fortifications hewn from jagged blue-gray stone were occupied by archers and mages. The main stronghold, however, was still obscured by smoke and magical eruptions. Several squads cleared a path for Naeala while others shouted ahead for their allies to do the same. Amid the noise she heard her name and title shouted. Cheers resounded around her, followed by chants of her name. The army parted farther than she had expected, and she soon neared the front line. It consisted of the most elite of the Kingdom Guard, golden-armored knights enhanced by magic. They were accompanied by towering creatures, trolls, renkaths, and yaltis. Elemental conjurations also pressed the line, humanoid creatures formed from rock, magma, flame, and water. There were even gigantic transmutations among them. As with the rest of the army, the creatures moved aside, revealing the Mindolarnian soldiers. Their plate armor was emblazoned with the emblem of their empire across their breastplates, a 7-headed crimson hydra. "Buck me," Naeala said, uttering an incantation. Telekinetic light swirled from her gauntlets to her boots. She dropped the reins and Tayshar halted, abruptly bowing his head. The motion catapulted Naeala. Then her telekinetic blast hurled her toward the Mindolarnians at a speed faster than a bolt leaving a crossbow. Almost instantly she collided with the enemy ranks. What would have been a deadly velocity was negated by the continual flow of Barshun from her tevisral breastplate. She hit the foothills, tumbling up the mountainside and knocking her foes out of the way. Rolling to her feet, Naeala spun and settled into a wide stance, her gauntlet fingers splayed. She glanced about as incantations sang through the air. No Mindolarnian around her had recovered from her concussive landing. Behind her, Tayshar bounded through the swath she had carved, the Lossian forces following him. Flexing her hands, Naeala darted toward the soldiers blocking the ascending pass. Her gauntlets hummed, then crackled as violet light surged from the gemstones, a disintegrating aura forming. She charged a soldier in red armor who was also surrounded by a thin veil of Barshun. The soldier evaded, stumbling backward. She swung again and her gauntlet fist collided with the soldier's Barshun, instantly shattering it. A wave of violet mist flew from the gemstones, engulfing the soldier and the air around him. Before the man could scream, he was consumed. Landing where the soldier would have fallen, Naeala bounded toward another Mindolarnian. Commands resounded from the enemy ranks, mingled with battle cries from both sides. She pummeled the soldier, and another wave of disintegrating mist consumed him. She pushed through the ranks, landing blow after blow that pierced Barshun and metal. Though she had designed the gauntlets to amplify the magic stored within them, she had not known they would be so destructive. Soon, Tayshar lunged beside Naeala, tackling a soldier and clawing the Mindolarnian's Barshun. But before Tayshar could breach it, pink orbs raced from the pass, erupting against his earthen body and hurling him away. But the repulsion was the only effect it had upon the transmuted feline. Naeala dodged magically enhanced weapons, narrowly evading the crackling blades and maces. Lossian battle cries grew louder and several Kingdom Guardsmen joined her. After killing a half-dozen more Mindolarnians, the violet mist ceased flowing. She continued attacking her nearest foe while swiftly mustering more disintegrating magic. Hand-to-hand combat was natural to her. Instinctive. Her martial skill was so great it did not inhibit her concentration while mustering magic. Dodging a blow, she directed the formed magic to the gemstones beneath her wrists. They absorbed most of the deadly magic while several particles brushed against her opponent's barshan. She ducked and spun, sweeping the soldier. Naeala flexed her hands as she swung at her foe, but the tevisral did not emit the magic. Metal struck barshan, and the man tumbled sideways. A flash of orange sped toward Naeala, seizing her vambrace. Orange light pulsed from a cord composed of life-draining magic. Its owner stood 20 paces away, a necromancer surrounded by a bubble of acid-infused barshan. Red particles flowed from her gloved hands. Annihilation particles. Naeala's eyes were drawn to the gate, positioned directly behind her attacker. Ignoring the soldier, Naeala bounded toward the necromancer. The red light surged along the life-draining cord, but neither magic phased her barshan. If her protective barrier were not from the tevisral, it would have weakened and possibly shattered. Leaping into the air, Naeala kicked the necromancer's acidic barrier, a flash of white emanating from her sabatons. The Mindolarnian screamed in surprise and flew backward, Naeala trailing after her, still bound by the life-draining cord. They knocked aside soldier and mage alike, cutting yet another swath through the Mindolarnian ranks. Before they landed, Naeala swiftly uttered a dispel. More white particles appeared, surrounding the orange magic. The cord flickered as the necromancer tumbled across the ground. Landing, Naeala shook off the fading magic and bounded toward the necromancer. Should have used an ensnaring cord. She struck the Mindolarnian's acidic barrier, a high-pitched hiss accompanying the blow. Naeala struck again, waves of violet light surging all around. 3 more blows and the barshan shattered, then the woman inside was consumed. Naeala bounded toward the closed gate as incantations rang from the pass. Soldiers fled from her, leaving the gate unguarded. They're going to rain magic. Wary, she glanced over her shoulder, searching for Teshar. The transmuted feline leapt atop a soldier, clawing the man's armor. Behind him, the Lossian forces were raising barricades along the swath, transmuted from the foothills. The liquefied stone soon became glistening metal, and was reinforced by barshan. Hopefully they make a tunnel. As she reached the blue-gray gate, deadly magics rained from fortifications up the mountainside, acidic bolts, arcane and disintegrating orbs, surges of lightning. With unnatural finesse Naeala avoided the deadly projectiles, but for every step she advanced toward the gate, she was repulsed. Arrows and bolts infused with magic also assailed her, some were laced with dispels. Amid her evasive dance she searched for an opponent to engage, but the Mindolarnians had retreated. Soon, a barshan barrier formed overhead, akin to what protected the war camp. But Naeala held her ground, lest the Mindolarnians break through the barshan. Heavy footfalls approached from behind her as well as the clanking of armor. Garbles of shouted commands were drowned by the eruptions overhead. Incantations joined the dissonance, and earthen walls rose along the path to the gate, forming a tunnel that darkened the area until a layer of barshan reinforced the transmuted shelter. Master Sai'ar. Naeala spun. A golden-armored soldier jogged toward her, lifting his visor and revealing the familiar wrinkled face of a childhood friend, Kamar Adala. I heard rumors that you had died, Kamar said. Naeala pursed her lips. You don't have to call me master. She turned, nodding toward the gate. Kamar chuckled. You know I do it out of respect. I am sure you do, Commander. A half-dozen mages had already run past them, mustering their magic a few paces from the fortification. Though the tunnel was dimly lit, the gate's seamless nature was apparent. This was not the first time Naeala had besieged a Mindolarnian gate, but after infiltrating the Hillinard she had learned more about their nature. Unlike other fortifications around the world, Mindolarnian defenses were maintained by tevisrals. The gate was indeed seamless, as it was maintained by a continual transmutation. Layers of Barshun reinforced the transmuted stone from within. The doors, which had no hinges, were also held in place by emitted magic. "Hold your incantations," Naeala shouted, raising her hand. Words were replaced by slow exhales. She looked about, studying the mages. All had obeyed. "There are tevisrals inside this gate." She moved toward the left wall and tapped a spot at shoulder height. "Focus on this point. It will disrupt the cohesive bond for the doors." Naeala hurried back to Kamar, and the incantations resumed. Violet beams soon struck the smooth wall where she had pointed. "I'm impressed," Kamar said, folding his arms. "Where did you learn that trick?" She succinctly answered, and when Kamar asked after why she had been in Mindolarn, she did not reply. "I don't suppose it has to do with your battle garb?" He eyed her, his brow raised. "After fighting alongside mages for 4 decades, you tend to notice when they look different." Naeala nodded, and Kamar sighed regretfully. A faint hum filled the tunnel, then the doors of the gate crumbled, sunlight pouring through. Overhead, Mindolarnian horns trumpeted a retreat. The Lossian ascent met no resistance. Naeala led the charge atop Teshar, holding tight to another set of transmuted reins. Kamar, however, had fallen back to the other members of the Kingdom Guard. Though the walls of the pass were jagged stone, the ascending floor was a smooth ramp, albeit steep in some places. The switchbacks eventually led to another gate, flanked by 2 towers. The defense's elaborate stonework consisted of sharp curves that resembled talons. The towers had that same distinct Mindolarnian design that resembled a serpentine claw clutching an egg. Mages stood atop an ornate parapet, veiled in myriad hues and ready to fling their spells. Naeala reared Teshar, scanning the final ascent. Several alcoves were nestled into the jagged rock face nearest the foothills. "Find a way through," she commanded and leapt toward the nearest alcove. "And sniff out the twins." Eruptions and flashes of light veiled the pass. "I need to bypass that gate." Though the retreat signaled by the horns was probably meant for those in the pass, she could not risk those in the fortress escaping. The towering conjurations charged past while the Lossian mages unleashed their own magic. While her allies laid siege to the second gate, Naeala whispered an incantation. She gathered white illusory particles, forming a brown hawk. Closing her eyes, she sent it flying and focused her vision through it. Besides the 100 or so mages at the gate, there were perhaps 1,000 soldiers and archers standing ready. More fortifications and towers overlooked the pass, each with a small contingent of mages mustering their magics. A large clearing spread beyond the gate, filled with partly constructed buildings, and a grand finial beyond them lay the towering fortress of Klatar, made from the same blue-gray rock as the mountain. Armor-clad figures, a mass of silver and red, were repulsed from the fortress by agents of the Order. Naeala veered the illusion toward the castle's eastern side. Lossian forces had already breached the gate of the center pass, clashing with Mindolarnian defenders. Among those barring the way to the castle were 2 figures in black armor, the 7-headed hydra on their breastplates glistening from inlaid onyx. "There you are." Veiled in invisibility, Naeala scaled the jagged mountainside by aid of the telekinetic magic stored in her sabatons. She soon landed in the clearing and dashed toward the fortress. The defending force had since been split, the Onyx twins amid the eastern division. Mustering more telekinetic magic, Naeala hurled herself over the battle. Though the Onyx twins were retreating, they left a devastating wake. Masses of flesh and metal were strewn across the battlefield. The sight sickened her, and her fury intensified. Today she would end that profane use of the vizirn. Naeala landed among the unrecognizable dead as the Mindolarnians retreated into unfinished structures east of the fortress. Crimson Praetorians held off Kingdom Guardsmen while the Onyx twins focused on the Lossian soldiers. Yurmulden bounded through the ranks, cutting through Barshan with his black blade. The weapon seethed a dissolving mist, turning metal and flesh to dust. Golden light swirled from Surika, coalescing behind soldier after soldier and sucking them through tiny portals. Still invisible, Naeala wove around gory heaps and straight for Yurmulden. She lunged, hurled by aid of her sabatons, and punched the twin as he struck a woman's Barshan. A violet burst veiled the air as Yurmulden was repulsed from the soldier. The twin spun as Naeala followed up with an arcing kick, knocking the twin off balance. But Yurmulden recovered, swinging his blade toward Naeala. "Show yourself, coward. Only when you die." She sidestepped, punching ferociously. Diabolical laughter left Yurmulden's helmet as Naeala repulsed him again, causing his form-fitting Barshan to flicker. "So, you've come to join your apprentice in death." Naeala lunged again, but before she struck, white light tinged her vision, and she felt her invisibility no longer. Yurmulden raised his blade, intercepting Naeala's gauntlet fist, their magics crackling. "There you are." The twin spun, swinging his blade, but Naeala evaded. Both moved at magically enhanced speeds, punching, slicing. As they fought, golden light swirled near Naeala, but she shifted the duel each time with telekinetic enhanced vaults. She couldn't be pulled through such a tiny portal while encased in Barshan, but she did not want to give Surika a glimmer of hope. Yurmulden's blade struck Naeala's Barshan several times, but the black particles did not so much as make her barrier flicker. His, on the other hand, had weakened considerably. The other Mindolarnians had since fled, and Lossian soldiers surrounded the duel. "Stay clear," Naeala shouted, dodging the black blade by closing the gap between her and Yurmulden. She kneed his right hip while hammering her fists against his left pauldrons. The concussive forces and her magic shattered his Barshan. Growling, Yurmulden shoved Naeala and tumbled backward. "Impressive." Surika shouted something in a guttural tongue, and Yurmulden responded with a single word laced with fury. The vile conjurer had since moved atop a nearby structure. Naeala closed the gap once again and knocked Yurmulden into a partly constructed wall. The stone cracked as he recovered. Strange words left his helmet, the odd magical tongue used by some Mindolarnians, and blue particles surged from his gauntlets, surrounding him. "Oh no, you don't." She lunged, striking his helmet. Yurmulden hit the wall again and stumbled over his words, his mustard magic flickering. The blow should have disintegrated his helmet, but it only dulled the polished sheen. The residual mist washed toward the wall, widening the crack, and he fell inside. What is that armor made of? Shaking the thought aside, Naeala bounded through the hole. The twin pushed himself up, and a layer of Barshan formed around him. They came to blows again, and Naeala's bursting magic dissolved parts of the structure. Above them, Surika spoke that odd tongue. Tumbling to evade a lunging stab, Naeala backed toward a pair of stairs. Yurmulden leapt toward her, blade raised. He sliced as he fell, but Naeala caught the magical blade. She pressed her gauntlet hands together, holding the weapon in place. All the while, the violet aura within the gauntlet's gemstones intensified. The twin chuckled. "You cannot break this Kodilish blah." Violet light exploded between them, and Naeala felt her gauntlets meet, the magic within them depleted. Yurmulden gasped. "Impossible." As the light dissipated, she mustered more disintegrating magic. Yurmulden's blade had been halved where Naeala had grabbed it, the severed end turned to black mist. He backed away, tossing the blade aside and uttering another incantation. Naeala attacked again while perfectly mustering her magic. Amid their blows, several tall human-like figures darkened the windows and doors. But Naeala paid little attention to them. She kept focus on mustering her magic while instinctively reacting to Yurmulden. Her magic soon surged into her gauntlets, but she felt some leached away. Spinning from Yurmulden, she looked about. 9 gray-skinned creatures surrounded her, enormous pores lining their 4 limbs. They were Quintessals, Mage's Banes, creatures that consumed magic. Their nearly featureless faces were focused on her, their five-sided mouths contorted in twisted smiles. The odd lips spread, and enormous pink tongues slithered toward her, each arrayed with more pulsing pores. Naeala lunged toward the nearest Quintessential and grabbed its mammoth tongue, wider around than a man's thigh. Blue and purple magic seeped into the tongue from the surrounding aura while some particles spread through the air, consumed by the other creatures. She uttered another incantation, intending to overload her new foe. Her magic dissolved parts of the Quintessential's moist flesh, but the creature consumed most of the particles. The Quintessential's moist gray skin turned a dingy purple, and it raised its tripod hands toward Naeala's face. Quintessentials had the capacity to repurpose magic, expelling it through slits in their palms. Those slits opened, but before it released its magic it fell limp. Magic leaked from its pores, as did its purple blood. Finished with her incantation, Naeala glowed with a disintegrating aura. Untold had since stepped away. The Quintessentials lashed their tongues, leeching her Barshun and the destructive aura. But Naeala did not relent. She grappled each of the creatures, forcing her magic into them until they collapsed, though before the last fell, her breastplate's Barshun reserves were depleted. A battle cry filled the air, and the Quintessential moved away. Untold charged, swinging a new black blade at Naeala. Though she was still engulfed in a disintegrating aura, it would not protect her from him, or Sarika. She darted away, throwing herself toward the nearest wall. It dissolved before she hit it, and she fell into a clearing, mustering more Barshun. A guttural incantation sounded above her. Sarika stood on a nearby balcony, golden light swirling around him. Untold bounded into the clearing, the Quintessential trailing behind him. "You cannot defeat us." A shadow sped over her, then Teshar tackled the advancing twin. Naeala faced the last Quintessential as golden light shot from Sarika. She ran toward the creature as it lunged, its tripod hands extended. Leaping aside, she spun and kicked the Quintessential, knocking it toward the tiny portal where she had stood. Its flailing tongue touched the mystical doorway and it vanished, evoking an enraged cry from Sarika. Blue particles surged into Naeala's breastplate and a barrier reformed, stoking Sarika's fury. His vehement screams filled the clearing as Naeala joined Teshar against Untold. He struggled against them and they soon weakened his Barshun. Teshar pinned the twin, and Naeala grabbed his helmet. Untold struggled to break free, but Naeala held tight. The winged ornaments of his helm dissolved, and then she finally breached the black metal. A yellow eye glared at Naeala. "For Lisna," she shouted, slamming her fist into the breach. The hole widened, and Naeala's gauntlet sank into the helmet. A hurried incantation sounded overhead, and she turned to see Sarika surrounded by the golden light of a portal. No sooner had the onyx twin vanished than 3 squads of Alathian mages entered the clearing. All but one, a transmuter by the sigil adorning his armor, took up positions around her. The transmuter looked young, perhaps no older than Almar. "I am Nemerin Dummel." He stared at Naeala. "And I presume you wear no ordinary battle garb." "They're here for me," she thought, and studied the mages. Each was mustering magic. She beckoned to Teshar and his body lost cohesion, his essence swirling toward her. Nemerin's eyes narrowed. "Are you in possession of unsanctioned tevisrals, Master Sai'ar?" Many a time Naeala had been the mage in Nemerin's position. Too many to safely escape. Her end had come. Sighing, she removed the tevisrals from her battle garb. "Take them. They've served their purpose." Her wrists bound by magic-inhibiting cords, Naeala sat within a large tent at the war camp's heart. Her mouth was gagged with a scarf made of the same substance as the cords. They were not tevisrals, nor were they made of magic. Rather they negated magic. The bindings veiled the tent in a greenish tint. 2 guards stood at the tent's entrance, their eyes trained on Naeala. She had not been tied to the chair. In fact, if she wished she could move about the tent freely. But she decided to sit and rest, awaiting her inevitable trial before the Order's council. Many soldiers had also returned, their conversations filtering into the tent as they passed by. Some spoke of Emperor Mendel's death, and she gleaned from various accounts that Almar had faced him one-on-one. Then, Almar had pursued Prince Magdalene, who would have been next in line to the throne. He was already struggling against 2 agents of the Order, but upon Almar's arrival they overtook him quickly. That leaves only 2 of the 7 brothers. She had heard nothing of Prince Martin, he was the most elusive. But Prince Monder had escaped with the help of one of his nephews, the Decimator of Angalith. The tent door flapped open and Kamar entered, clad in his golden armor, his helmet under his arm. Time had not been kind to him, in 5 years his once brown hair speckled with gray had turned completely white. And here I hoped you would have escaped. The guards turned to Kamar, each looking confused, but he extended his free hand to placate them. I'm only here to see an old friend. Neither relaxed. Kamar strode through the tent, grabbed another wooden chair and placed it beside Naeala. I want you to know it wasn't me, or any in my command. She nodded. Kamar leaned back, shaking his head. Oh, Naeala, you were always mischievous. They sat in silence until the young mage, Nemorin, entered with 2 of the Order's council mages, Praetor and Neremus. Naeala couldn't help but resent Nemorin. But she knew what she had done, and she had not made the decision lightly. I don't regret it. She had accepted that her life would end this day. Praetor shook his head upon seeing Naeala. I don't believe it. Nay, I don't want to believe it. Neremus, however, frowned in disgust as a sandy brown-haired mage entered the tent, clad in his battle garb. He looked not quite middle-aged, but there was a maturity to him. Those hazel eyes of his looked old. You summoned me, masters. Neremus nodded. Please come with us. I wish to be present, Kamar said, rising from his chair. May I? The council mages looked at each other, and Praetor nodded. Neremus inclined his head in what could barely be considered a nod. They gathered around Naeala, Kamar gently placing a gauntlet hand on her shoulder. Once they were all touching, Neremus spoke a teleporting incantation, mustering golden light and whisking them off to Alath. Kamar insisted he escort Naeala to the Order's council chamber. Of all the structures on Kalda there was nothing more beautiful or majestic as the estate of Concorious knowledge. Its walls were made from the purest of alabaster, accented with elaborate golden molding and trim that shone like sunlight. As she approached the council chamber, Naeala savored these brief moments in the estate halls. I will never walk them again, she thought. These exquisite halls would be the last glimpse of beauty she would ever experience. The council chamber was no less majestic, an expansive alabaster room rising 3 stories, its ceiling supported by 6 pillars that bore the glowing emblems of the Order's foundational archetypes, arpranists, barshunists, conjurers, illusionists, transmuters, and wizards. These symbols glowed with hues representative of the primary channel of power used by each discipline. White light shone from elegant symbols etched into the deep coffered ceiling. Moonlight poured through a glass dome at the chamber's center. Golden framing spread throughout it, a half-globe of Kalda with Alath positioned at the dome's apex. And at the room's far end rose a wide dais spanning the distance between the pillars. It was curved, as was the elaborate dark wood table atop it, allowing the council mages to face one another and anyone standing before them. Naeala had stood at that dais many times, reporting on her assignments as an agent of the Order. The guards stopped her and Kamar, then took sentinel positions behind them. Nemorin and the other mage stood to the side, whispering. Only 3 of the council's mages were seated behind the curved table. Soon, others arrived. Grand Master Thelamar Corrida stared hard at Naeala. During her tutelage at the estate he had taught her the ways of the Vizurm Expanse and the Aldonal Plane. Most of the others she knew by reputation only. Per tradition, everyone was silent, waiting for the Grand Master to begin the meeting. Eventually, all but 2 chairs were filled, one beside the Grandmaster and another 2 seats to his left. Thelomar looked about the council chamber, his face heavy with emotion. We have won much today, but we have also lost much. He grimaced at Naeala. Why hadn't he waited for the other 2 to arrive? And it pains me that we will lose even more. But before proceeding, we must make our council whole. Brethren, I submit before you 2 worthy of succeeding Gerald and Medaira. Behold, Dorith and Nemorin. Those in favor of accepting them, please signify it. One by one, each council mage stood. But instead of taking their seats they shifted, making the seats on either end vacant. Nemorin, please sit to my right, Thelomar said, then gestured with his left hand toward Dorith. Together the 12 mages took their seats, their eyes on Naeala. Then Thelomar continued. We have heard grievous things, Naeala Sai'ar. And I wished they were not true. Violations of the edicts are not taken lightly. This you know. Never in all my days have I seen one of our own disobey our kingdom's supreme law. Nor has it happened since the treachery of Prince Gadith. Thelomar related to the council Naeala's actions at the battle in the Clotar Mountains and her use of unsanctioned tevisrals. Questions were put before her from each council member, and she responded by writing upon parchment. She answered truthfully, except for the whereabouts of her unfinished work, she could not bear to have the tevisrals destroyed. Kamar read her answers aloud. His voice wavered as he relayed Lisna's fate and the motives behind Naeala's actions. The edicts are flawed, she wrote. Doran was a fool. Our enemies have grown strong while we've remained stagnant for almost a millennium. That is why I created a means to thwart them. How many lives could have been saved if it were not for those edicts? The blood of the slain stains Doran's hands. Several council mages flinched, including Nemorin. Others sighed, while Thelomar bowed his head. Dorith, however, nodded. I have heard enough, Thelomar said. Do any others wish to question her further? The room remained silent, and the Grandmaster stood. Naeala Sai'ar. It is my regret, and my shame, that I convict you of violating the edicts of the Mage-King on 12 counts. He paused, wiping his eyes. We sentence you to the depths of Outlawed for the remainder of your days, forfeiting your title and rank within this order. Brethren, those who support this conviction, please signify it. All rose except Dorith. Kamar gasped, raising an eyebrow and whispering to Naeala. What does that mean? The Grandmaster cleared his throat. Dorith, do you wish to explain yourself? I do not believe her guilty. The edicts of the Mage-King are clear, any citizen found in possession of tevisrals beyond those sanctioned would be put to the law. But the term tevisral in that document is specific to devices created around or before the time of the Karthar Empire. Dorith stood, and stepped off the dais, moving toward Kamar. At that same moment, the doors to the council chambers opened, followed by the echoing of thick-soled boots. Naeala's attention, however, remained fixed on Dorith. Furthermore, I can't agree to your counts, Grandmaster. She created 6 tevisrals, not 12. Creation, by any means, is not punishable, nor is it implied anywhere in the edicts. You are arguing semantics, Nemorin said. All tevisrals are a violation of the edicts, Dorith. There is no room for exception. Several others voiced their agreement, but before anyone argued further, the Grandmaster held out a hand to silence them. Your Majesty. Premier General, what brings you here? Naeala started, looking over her shoulder. 2 men approached. One wore a plain metallic mask and a dark green battle doublet with matching trousers, an embroidered ivory sigil of the Kingdom Guard woven upon his chest, a staff surrounded by 12 7-pointed stars over 2 curved blades, with 6 vines reaching from the blades to the stars. The other was an attractive sandy-haired man in his middle years, with exquisite blue eyes. Though she had never met King Kalidar, Naeala had heard him described as handsome. His attire was no less impressive, a metallic white doublet and matching trousers, accented by black boots. But why was the king at her trial? Had he been at the battle? Neither answered until near the dais. King Kalidar studied Naeala, but didn't speak. We heard of Master Sai'ar's exploits, the Premier General said. And we wanted to hear the truth. Why? Asked a council mage. The determination of his council cannot be swayed. I apologize, Your Majesty, but if you've come for such a reason, we cannot permit it. The king laughed. Do you think me a fool, Lactus? I know the edicts well. Only Doran can forgive a trespass against his law. And he's dead, Naeala thought. Long dead. The thought enraged her. How he had damned her people. I wouldn't dare attempt a pardon, the king added. But I do wish to observe her punishment. What admiration she had for Kalidar evaporated. Had he come from the capital, or wherever he had been, to watch? Was she just sport for him? A monumental event during his reign? I assume you've reached a verdict, asked Graydon. We were voting, Thelamar said. And Dorith here was arguing for a mistrial. She isn't in violation, Dorith insisted. Lactus snorted. We need only a majority ruling. Take your seat, young one. The Grandmaster nodded. Please sit, Dorith. Sighing, Dorith returned to his seat. Naeala Sai'ar, we Mages of Alath strip you of your title and condemn you to the depths of Audiobook. We hereby give custody of you to His Majesty, King Kalidar of House Orn, and Premier General Graydon. The council mages sat while Graydon approached Naeala and Kamar. Your services are no longer needed, guardsman. He took Naeala by the arm, pulling her away from her friend. Let me see her out, Kamar insisted. Graydon studied him, then nodded in agreement. The night sky was clear, and Kalda's moon shone brighter than the night before. His Majesty led Naeala and Kamar to a large caravan gathered on the road wrapping around the estate's main hall. While the king marched toward a large black carriage, Graydon stopped, holding a hand out in front of Kamar. I'm afraid this is as far as you go. Say your farewells. Kamar wrapped his arms around Naeala, and whispered, I'll try to get reassigned to Audiobook. I won't let you be alone. Naeala tried smiling through her gag. If only she could say her goodbyes. But at least she had seen one friendly face before embracing lifelong misery. The king held the carriage's door open, and Graydon urged her in with a firm push. She tripped, but managed to regain her footing. Please sit, the Premier General said, motioning to a plush bench. King Kalidar called for the caravan to move, then entered the carriage and shut the door. Naeala sat, and a pang of hunger struck her. I doubt they'll feed me. Overcome by exhaustion, she leaned her head back against a headrest softer than anything she had ever felt. Despite her bonds, she felt comfortable, so much so that she drifted into slumber. A sudden jolt roused Naeala, and she found herself lying on the carriage's bench. Good, you're awake, Graydon said. Still drowsy, Naeala pushed herself upright inside the now stationary carriage. Her wrists were no longer bound, nor was she gagged. What's going on? The Premier General's lips twisted in mirth. Besides his eyes, they were the only feature she could see under his metal mask. You'll understand soon enough. King Kalidar had an equally amused expression on his face. Were they playing a game with her? She fought the urge to bolt from the carriage. But what if an ambush waited outside? Cautious, Graydon said. Calculated. Upon studying him again, his lips looked more pleased than mirthful. She will do nicely, the king said, opened the carriage door, and stepped into a woodland grove with a slight hill at its heart. To Naeala's surprise, no ambush was waiting. She moved ahead of Graydon, poking her head out. Besides the carriage, the grove was empty, the only other person nearby was the carriage's young driver. Naeala stepped down, and entered the grove. The first hints of sunlight passed through the trees to the west. What are we doing here? Possibilities ran through her mind, each growing increasingly sinister. Could this be a trap? She spun, studying the king and the premier general. They couldn't be imposters, could they? While infiltrating the Hillinard, she had learned the Mindolarnians were trying to duplicate an ancient tevisral capable of shifting one's form, not an illusion, but an actual transformation, and one that could not be dispelled. The ancient versions were rings, weren't they? She darted a glance to the king's fingers, but he wore no jewelry. Graydon, however, wore a green-gray ring on his right forefinger, tiny green gemstones inlaid along its center. Could that? The flapping of wings carried from the west, quickly growing louder. Naeala spun as a shadow swept over the grove, the wing beats louder than any bird she had ever heard. The noise faded, and a winged shape appeared over the trees. That's no bird. She blinked in disbelief as a winged serpent, composed of dirt and as large as a small cottage, eased into the clearing, a robed rider upon its back. Though she had never seen such a beast, she recognized its features from texts at the estate of Concorious Knowledge. A drake. The transmutation lowered its head, and its rider dismounted. He wore golden armor fused to his maroon robe, and upon his back was strapped an ornate off-white staff with flowery designs. Naeala flinched. That couldn't be the king's scepter. No, Doran's relic, an ornate channeling staff, had been lost centuries ago. Only its depiction lived on in the emblem of the Kingdom Guard. The man grabbed the staff as he stepped into the clearing, standing a height equal to Naeala. He took 3 steps toward her, then planted the staff in the grass. Master Sai'ar, please come forward. She recognized that voice. But it can't be. Arundel is dead. Obey your king, Kalidar urged. Naeala glanced over her shoulder and saw King Kalidar pointing to the newcomer. My king. She turned back to the robed man. Who are you? Chuckling, the man tapped the crest of a winged serpent emblazoned upon his breastplate. Each piece of armor glowed a soft white hue, then folded in upon itself. The maroon robe remained, but the golden armor compressed, becoming a simple round pendant. Naeala stumbled backward. She knew his face. You are Arundel. Be but how? He smiled, the wrinkles around his lips deepening. Arundel looked as he had the day he died. Not the name I intended to use today, but it will do. He looked past Naeala. Is everything ready? Nearly, the king replied. The prisoner needs to be prepared. Best you do that, Arundel said. We can handle things from here, Uzalanath. If the king replied, it was not with words. The carriage's door shut, and the clip-clop of horse hooves carried through the grove. What is going on? Naeala asked. Perhaps I'm dreaming. An official pardon, Arundel said. Would you like that, Naeala? She wrinkled her forehead. Did he have to ask? Anything is better than rotting in Audiobook. But you can't be real. Arendel's lips twitched as if to hold back laughter. He looked behind her, and she followed his gaze, watching Graydon approach. Enough with the ceremonious pomp, Graydon said, grunting. Tell her already. Naeala turned back to Arundel, studying his hazel eyes. I am pardoning you, Naeala, because I am the architect of Los's edicts. I am Doran, the Mage-King. She snorted, then hastily covered her mouth with her hand. Doran is dead, and so are you. The persona of Arundel might be dead, but I am very much alive, and have been for centuries. He studied her with a kind, paternal gaze. You are too priceless to be thrown away. Your understanding of tevisrals is unprecedented in this current era. And your prowess on the battlefield is rare. You are like unto the ancient fistfusers of the Chaldean alliance, who fought back Chesrith and his abominations. Naeala narrowed her eyes at the man, Arundel, Doran, whoever stood in front of her. The thought of him actually being Doran kindled the anger she had for the long-dead king. Your contempt is justified, the man said. Blood indeed stains my hands. The edicts were never meant to endure this long. And that is why you are here, to help us prepare Kalda for the restoration of its former grandeur. Her resentment waned. Those were not words she expected to hear from a man claiming to be Doran. We wish for you to join us, the Premier General said, standing beside Naeala. To become a guardian of Kalda, a keeper of truth and might. The robed man nodded. Your character is befitting one of our order. You would be a great asset. And if I refuse? Then you are on your own, Graydon said. Regardless, you are free. The robed man leaned on his staff. If you accept, you will craft tevisrals far grander than you can imagine. It is your choice, Master Naeala Sai'ar. Kneel and accept, or refuse and walk from this grove. Naeala considered the choices. Life as a vagabond would not be pleasant, although she had learned to find peace in seclusion. Perhaps she could find it again. But could she dismiss the chance to create tevisrals of wonder? As with the summons to battle, she knew what she must do. Taking a deep breath, Naeala knelt before Doran, the Mage-King. The end of Legacy of the Past. A Legends of Kalda story. About the authors. Dan Zangari is the creator of the Legends of Kalda fantasy universe, a work in development since the early 1990s. He received a Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Southern California and a master's degree in Systems Management. His love for science fiction and fantasy prompted the creation of this fantasy universe. When he's not writing, he enjoys reading, watching movies, spending quality time with family and serving in his local church congregation. Robert Zangari is the co-author of the various books which belong to the Legends of Kalda universe. He studied biomedical engineering at the University of Utah, however, his love for stories and storytelling took him down a different career path. When he's not writing, he enjoys spending time with his wife and daughters, playing video games, practicing martial arts and immersing himself in a good story. Other titles by Dan Zangari and Robert Zangari. For an up-to-date list of publications, visit the official Legends of Kalda website, http://www.legendsofkalda.com/books.html. Published by LOK Publishing. Tales of the Amulet. Novels. A Prince's Errand. The Dark Necromancer. Elven Secrets. The Mage's Agenda. Treachery in the Kingdom. The Red Ruby. Companion Stories. A Thief's Way. The Last Bargainist. Mysterious Assassin. Return of the Elves. A Forgotten Hero. Guardians of Kalda. Untold Tales of Kalda. Defender of Stone. Conspiracy in Kildath. Thieves among Nobles. Sorter of Mages. The Price of Penitence. Beneath the Frozen Wastes. Novels coming soon. A King's Fate. The Golden Dragons. Reign of the Black Knight. Companion Stories coming soon. A Knight's Honor. Crown of the Cavernlands. A Legend Reborn. Connect with the authors. Exclusive Readers Club. http://www.legendsofkalda.com/newsletter.html. LOK Publishing's official website. www.legendsofkalda.com. Twitter https://twitter.com/legendsofkalda. Official Facebook page https://www.facebook.com/legendsofkalda. We hope you've enjoyed this production of Legacy of the Past by Dan Zangari and Robert Zangari. Text copyright 2022 by LOK Publishing, LLC. Production copyright 2023 by LOK Publishing, LLC. All rights reserved.